Kind of give you a context to my work where it currently is at, just let you know where my work has evolved over time. So yeah, I did my undergrad at CSU Hayward in the Bay Area, and then I went to grad school at CSU Long Beach. So even back in undergrad, I was really interested about how a person navigates spaces in various different places. And I've lived all over California. I've traveled to 11 different countries. And my work really has always been about those experiences I've had at these different places. And when I went to grad school, I was really shocked by all the environmental devastation that was happening down there with the oil drilling in the area and grappling. So I was making a lot of work about that. And actually, CSU Long Beach is right next to oil refineries. So I was making a lot of work watching the construction that was happening at these sites and recording it over time for my paintings. So there was a lot of accumulated buildup. And in 2021, I got a job at CSU Stanislaus. So I moved from this really highly industrialized place out here to the Central Valley. So my work shifted greatly. And for about 2 years, I was making work about the fires and floods in the area. And I like to call them my disaster paintings. And I realized after making all of that work, I really wanted to shift directions. I didn't want to focus on all this devastation that was happening, but rather have the audience and myself think about our relationship with the environment in a more positive way. So when you look at this exhibition, you'll see the painting over there, the blue and the yellow, and the painting behind me, Zenith, were actually the precursors for this whole entire show. So I was still making these disaster paintings, but I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go with it. And I had these elements in the paintings that I hope that the viewer would recognize as a potential hope, right? A renewal that would happen after like the cleansing floods or the fires. So when you look at this one over here, that under red painting is like the scarring that happens after a fire, and then the rebirth that's going on. And so that was the impetus for basically everything in this show. I really wanted to make work that looked at this potential, like the budding flower growing up in the environment around us. And when you think about the title of the show, ARCADIA, we have this convention, this idea of a pastoral, idyllic, and highly cultivated place. And I thought, well, that is a kind of model I don't want to replicate, right? I don't want to impose upon nature, but rather think about like permaculture strategies, where we're looking at nature and trying to replicate that for something more positive. And so, in that way, that's how I imagine the construction of these paintings, right? It's sort of vibrant forest of growth, the uncultivated garden of earthly delights, as we read in my statement. So a lot of this work I made at a residency in Vermont. So just to talk about that briefly, I would go out on these daily hikes and I would record all the flowers that I would find in these hikes, and I would make three-dimensional models. And then I would match them up in three-dimensional space to make these new amalgams. So they're kind of like different perspectives all smashed together to make the paintings. And so yeah, my work ultimately is really interested in about how do we navigate space, how do we understand the places that we're in, and how do we reconcile our relationship with mediated technology. And rather than thinking about technology as the surveillance tool, it could be a tool to help us imagine a better future. And you probably noticed from all the work that I'm really into science fiction. And I also read at the same time that I made these two paintings, Donna Haraway's Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Cathulcine, and she was a big proponent of let us be compost, right? Let us work together with our non-human participants on the planet and technology to imagine a better future. And that's really what I hope that you can get out of these paintings, is this, hope for for something better and let us reinvestigate our relationship with our environment. So we also talk individually about how some of this work was constructed, because a lot of people came up to me the other day and mentioned, you must really like acrylic paint. And actually, a lot of these are oil paintings, and a lot of them were started with acrylic underpainting and then finished with oil on top. So these paintings don't happen in one session, they happen over time. Even though they have a flat surface, they have a lot of material buildup. So if we look at, for example, this painting here, I started it in Vermont, and then I took it home back to my home studio and then finished it at home. And it actually went through many layers of translation from the initial 3D modeling that I did, the mashup that happened, the masking, the peeling back, and the layering of the paint to make the final image. And when you look at this one in particular, I like the idea that the juxtaposition to the one over here. So we have a sort of night and day, right? So we have a full cycle in this sort of art space where we're all present here together. And in the middle, we see this water that's in the center that's feeding this whole entire ecosystem. We have the foxglove, this dangerous plant that we don't want to consume, and then it's falling apart and degrading as it becomes this lily. So I was hoping that we could see that sort of cycle. In each of the paintings, but specifically this one. And the one over there, plotting, there's many different components that are made over various sessions with the same sort of centralized water in the middle, which is feeding this entire garden system. So even though each of the plants are sequestered in these rectangular formats, they're trying to break free of the format that they're confined in, right? So they don't want to be cultivated, they don't want to be constrained. And I'm hoping that eventually this installation experience could grow over the years, just as the paintings themselves grow over time. I have one last thing to say about that in particular. I've been looking at a lot of Persian miniatures and rugs, and so when you look at the motifs, the central form is actually water. The garden is a place of respite, and the quadrants of the carpet are the different zones, like north, south, east, west. And in the center is water, which feeds the whole system. So I was kind of thinking about it, I was like, oh, wouldn't that be a really cool thing to do in a painting? You might notice I like portals a lot. That's all. You can see that I have some studies on the back wall, so I do that quite a bit. I make a lot of different studies that then I pull and extrapolate, and they come into the paintings in terms of color palette. So yeah, that's my first, one of the first forays into the modeling software, and how could I really extrapolate the different forms and make them feel like they're emerging from a bud state into a flowering state. So it's been really interesting to investigate those strategies and really think about, can I make a more dangerous, more resilient plant, right? That one that can withstand all the things that we do to our environment. And I hope that you all feel invigorated by all the color. For me, I love color. I consider myself a colorist for sure. And I think color has a sort of sensual thing. You come into the room and you have an experience with it, you feel engulfed by it, you have an emotional reaction with it. And that's ultimately what I want to create, is an experience for the viewer. And I think that's pretty much it. I'd be happy to answer any questions pertaining to the work.
I had a question.
Yeah.
You touched on permaculture.
Yeah.
Can you kind of speak to your ethos on how art and permaculture, or for those who don't know about permaculture, taking care of the earth in general, how those two kind of go hand in hand?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. Thank you, Tracy. Obviously, I'm not actually myself cultivating plants, although I do love to garden myself. I think what's important is looking at these natural systems and how we can mimic them in our lives. One that considers how do we recycle materials, for example, and make sure that we're recycling things and not creating excessive waste. So in terms of my practice, I recycle paintings, I keep all the paint, they come back into the paintings, or I make sculptural forms. I make a lot of the structures, most of these aren't, but I've been having these structures in this show for many years, so when I don't have a painting anymore, I roll it up and I reuse the materials. So I think that's an important lesson to learn, is like trying to eliminate as much waste as possible and to recycle. And then, you know, they're paintings, so they're sort of an illusion, right? They're a fiction. And I think that's another important thing, is that we need room for the poetics of language, but also the poetics of the image, and that the image can introduce us to these ideas about looking at natural systems and why they're important to us.
Awesome. Any other questions for Mirabel?
Yeah.
I'm just curious. When I see this, and I feel like the plants are trying to come back to live, and then I look under there and I see this person lying under there, like he's trying, like they're all trying to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of where you're going with that, or am I wrong with that? That's just a feeling I get, like,
Is it just what you see?
yeah, or is it just what I see? I just feel like all this here is trying to survive.
This is a very interesting painting. We can talk about this. So, I go to a lot of residencies. So this painting was made after a residency, and I was hiking up along the Central Coast. And I was thinking a lot about, all these fires that were happening across the state. Obviously, there was this really terrible fire recently in Southern California. And how, I can capture the essence of that, but not make it the highlight of the work. Because I was making a lot of paintings before where the impetus, the central image was the disaster, but I really wanted that after effect. And at the same time, while I was thinking about those things, Google had, is now discontinued, but they had the photosphere function on your phone. So you can do an in-the-round experience, and you can feel like you're immersed. And wow, I could replicate that in a painting to make that kind of curvilinear perspective. The audience feel like you're actually immersed in this space that's growing together. So you kind of run on.
I do feel that with your artwork.
Thank you. I like that, what you were saying about this person being in resilience and like emerging through. Because I was thinking about a little bit more abstractly, but essentially that,
Yeah, because I really have felt that in both of those. It's all about surviving, thriving.
I love that. Thank you. I love that, because what I really think about painting is not trying to replicate the world I see, but trying to make it visible, our feelings visible. That's what I hope you all experience here. Whatever that is, as long as it's an emotional, spiritual resonance, I'm happy. I did something right.